Good morning. Let's begin in our book, Disciplines of a Godly Man by R. Kent Hughes. Yesterday we started in our book in chapter 2, and today we want to continue on in that chapter, which is entitled Discipline of Purity. And we're going to be looking at a section entitled Lessons from a Fallen King. Where are we to turn for help? The most instructive example in all of God's Word is the experience of King David as it is told in 2 Samuel 11. Life at the top. As the account begins, David is at the summit of his brilliant career, as high as any man in biblical history. From childhood, he had been a passionate lover of God and possessed an immense integrity of soul, as attested by Samuel's words when he anointed him as king. Samuel said, "Men looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." 1 Samuel 16:7. God liked what he saw. God liked David's heart. He was a brave heart. It was evidenced when he met Goliath and returned the giant's fearsome rhetoric with some spine-tingling words of his own. Then charged full speed into battle, nailing Goliath right between the headlights. That's 1 Samuel 17:45-49. David had an archetypal sanguine personality brimming with joy, enthusiasm, and confidence, and overflowing with irresistible charisma. He was the poet, the sweet psalmist of Israel, so in touch with God and himself that his psalms pluck the heartstrings of many men today. Under his leadership, all Israel had been united. David hardly seemed a candidate for moral disaster, but the king was vulnerable, for there were definite flaws in his conduct which left him open to tragedy. Desensitization. 2 Samuel 5, which records David's initial assumption of power in Jerusalem, mentions almost as an aside that after he left Hebron, David took more concubines and wives in Jerusalem. You see that in verse 13. We must note, and know well, that David's taking additional wives was sin. Deuteronomy 17, which set down the standards for Hebrew kings, commanded that they refrain from three things. Number 1, acquiring many horses. Number 2, taking many wives. And number 3, accumulating much silver and gold. David did fine on 1 and 3, but he completely failed on number 2 by willfully collecting a considerable harem. We must understand that a progressive desensitization to sin and a consequent inner descent from holiness had taken root in David's life. David's collection of wives, though it was legal and not considered adultery in the culture of that day, was nevertheless sin. King David's sensual indulgence desensitized him to God's holy call in his life, as well as to the danger and consequences of falling. In short, David's embrace of socially permitted sensuality desensitized him to God's call and made him easy prey for the fatal sin of his life. Men, it is the legal sensualities, the culturally acceptable indulgences, which will take us down. The long hours of indiscriminate TV watching, which is not only culturally cliche but is expected as the American male would do, is a massive culprit of desensitization. The expected male talk, coarse humor, laughter at things which ought to make us blush is another deadly agent. Acceptable sensualities have insidiously softened Christians' men, as statistics will attest. A man who succumbs to desensitization of the legal sensualities is primed for a fall. Relaxation. The second flaw in David's conduct, which opened him to disaster, was his relaxation from the rigors and disciplines which had been part of his active life. David was at midlife, about 50 years old, and his military campaigns had been so successful. It was not necessary for him to personally go off to war. He rightly gave the mopping up job to General Joab, and then relaxed. The problem was his relaxation extended to his moral life. It is hard to maintain inner discipline when you are relaxing in this way. David was eminently vulnerable. David did not suspect anything unusual was going to happen on that fatal spring day. He did not get up and say, "My, what a beautiful day. I think I will commit adultery today." May this lesson not be wasted on us, men. Just when we think that we are at our safest, when we feel no need to keep our guard up, to work on our inner integrity, to discipline ourselves for godliness, temptation will come. Fixation. A reading from 2 Samuel 11, 1 through 3. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Again, 2 Samuel 11, 1 through 3. It had been a warm day and evening was falling. The king strode out on the rooftop for some cool air and took a look at his city at dusk. As he gazed, his eyes caught the form of an unusually beautiful woman who was bathing without modesty. As to how beautiful she was, the Hebrew is explicit. The woman was beautiful of appearance. Very. She was young in the flower of her life, and the evening shadows made her even more enticing. The king looked at her, and he continued to look. After the first glance, David should have turned the other way and retired to his chamber, but he did not. His look became a sinful stare, and then a burning, sweaty leer. In that moment, David, who had been a man after God's own heart, became a dirty, leering old man. A lustful fixation came over him that could not be denied, or would not be denied. Dietrich Bonhoeffer made the observation that when lust takes control, and I quote, "At this moment, God loses all reality. Satan does not fill us with hatred of God, but with forgetfulness of God." End quote. What a world of wisdom this is in this statement. When we're in the grip of lust, the reality of God fades. The longer King David leered, the less real God became to him. Not only was his awareness of God diminished, but David lost awareness of who he himself was, his holy call, his frailty, and the certain consequences of sin. This is what lust does. It has done it millions of times. God disappears to lust-glazed eyes. Men, the truth demands some serious questions. For example, has God faded from view? Did you once see him in bright hues, but now his memory is blurred like an old sepia photograph? Do you have an illicit fixation which has become all you can see? Is the most real thing in your life your desire? If so, you're in deep trouble. Some decisive steps are necessary, as we shall see. Rationalization. From deadly fixation, King David descended to the next level down, which is rationalization. When his intent became apparent to his servants, one tried to dissuade him, saying, "Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" But David would not be rebuffed. Some massive rationalization took place in David's mind, perhaps very much as J. Allen Peterson has suggested in The Myth of the Greener Grass. I quote, "Uriah is a great soldier, but he's probably not much of a husband or lover. Years older than she is. And he'll be away for a long time. The girl needs a little comfort in her loneliness. This is one way I can help her. No one will get hurt. I do not mean anything wrong by it. This is not lust. I have known that many times. This is love. This is not the same as finding a prostitute on the street. God knows that. And to the servant, bring her to me." End quote. The mind controlled by lust has an infinite capacity for rationalizations. Let me give you 5 examples. Number 1, how can something that has brought so much enjoyment be wrong? Number 2, God's will for me is to be happy. Certainly he would not deny me anything which is essential to my happiness, and this is it. Number 3, the question here is one of love. I'm acting in love, the highest love. Number 4, my marriage was never God's will in the first place. And number 5, you Christians and your narrow, judgmental attitudes make me sick. You are judging me. You are a greater sinner than I'll ever be. Let's end with some food for thought. The contemporary evangelical church, broadly considered, is Corinthian to the core. We read that in chapter 1. It is being stewed. We read that in the beginning of this chapter. It was being stewed in the molten juice of its own sensuality. Do you agree or disagree? Concerning your own church, even considering your own personal life. What we read from this morning, our food for thought is this: at this moment of lust, God loses all reality. Satan does not fill us with hatred of God, but with forgetfulness of God. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So the question is, guys, have you found this true in your own battles with temptation? That we have a forgetfulness of God. Have you found this true in your own battles with temptation? And secondly, what is the most effective way to prevent moral lapses? Thanks for joining me again today. God bless you.